my name is Ezeonyebuchi, and welcome to my talk, Break Things to Fix Things. Today I'm going to talk about how while we're testing, we should really be testing more than just what we assume should be working. All right, to give you a little bit information about me, as I mentioned earlier, my name is Ijeoma. I always add phonetics because I've been told that my name is not the most easily understood name out there, which is okay. I like it, so all works out. I currently work as a quality assurance engineer at NPR. I work a lot about using tools and processes to find what works, and more importantly, what could work better. Lately, I've mostly been working on mobile applications, such as Android and iOS native applications, and the backend services that power them. Applications such as NPR1, the NPR app. You might see bugs in those apps, and if you do, you can always talk to me later. I'm here. All right, so let's get started. Let's start by talking about what testing is all about. Well, now I do work on mobile applications. I've worked across web services, APIs, and my definition of testing and what testing really means has changed a lot over time. Typically during testing, one might say that we look to verify intended behaviors. We want to make sure what we assume would work when we build an application is actually what happens after we've built it. We want to find bugs and defects. Anything that is not working, we'd like to know. And from a more product standpoint, we want to gauge release readiness. How ready are we to release this new brand feature? By a show of hands, how many people here would agree with these statements? Would agree that while you are testing something, you are generally trying to accomplish these three goals? All right. And the second question, how many people here would say that if you do these three things and any tasks associated with them, you have done comprehensive testing? So by doing these three tasks, you have achieved the best testing you could have on your application or your product. Anyone? It's okay, you know. Well, you guys are very smart individuals because, in the wise words of Willy Wonka, if you had said yes, you would be kind of right, but also kind of wrong. But why? Why is this not the best way to test an application? Well, we should really be thinking of testing as a lot more than output checking, a lot more than just verifying what we might know. And to put it more side by side, when we think about checking versus testing, we say checking is about validating what we know. Let's test what we know, but we might not actually know everything about our application. But we say testing is about evaluating a product by learning through exploration and experimentation. So this is where we find what we don't know, where we think a lot more about the user and how they might use the product as a whole. And to put it more simply, when we check something, we check a feature, we perform a task. This feature should work like this, we test it like this, and it works or it doesn't. When we test, we learn about our application. We go beyond what we expect should work, we try and see what we don't know and how to improve it in the process. Put more simply, discovering the unexpected is more important than confirming what we know. If we were to build a feature and it was awesome and great and everything that we said would work worked, and we released it to production, the user found something that wasn't a feature or wasn't a requirement but is obviously a user flaw, it wouldn't be very beneficial to us. So in terms of this, I thought the best way to demonstrate this would be by giving you a demo of a bug that I might or might not have noticed while I was testing an application that went to production. All right, so here's a real-world example. A couple months ago, we did a re-architecture on our NPR1 Android client. We didn't change any features, but we had a legacy code base, and we wanted to update it using MVVM architecture patterns. And after we did that work, which is maybe a week, the developers signed to me hey, could you just do some regression testing? We're pretty sure we haven't broken anything, but we just want to make sure that things are still working. And I was like, sure, it's a quick test. For those of you who don't know, NPR is a radio network across the nation, so a very important thing for us to be able to do is to find different radio stations. So here are the assumptions I made while testing. Firstly, if I search for a valid station, we should get results. So if we have something in our APIs, we should get that result returned back to us. Very simple test. And also, if I search for something invalid, a station that does not exist, we wouldn't get those results returned. We did have, some testing on this in the back end and the client side, so this wasn't that it was our first time testing, but these were my two assumptions I basically had while I was testing. And in doing so, this is what I found. On the my left, your right, if I search for stations such as OPB, Oregon Public Broadcasting, it exists. It showed up in the search results. That was great. And when I searched for a station that should not exist, there was no station to my knowledge named random, so I decided to go by that query. Nothing was returned, which would mean the test passed. But if you look a little bit closer, you'll see in the messaging, we returned a message that says no results for Q equals random %20. By show of hands, how many people here would say that you see that Q equals query and understand what it means? That makes kind of sense to you. Okay. It's also worth noting that we are at a conference full of DevOps, developer, and QA professionals. So, for instance, my siblings, they saw this and they had no idea what that meant. So, in terms of if we think about our findings, the assumptions worked. I could find an invalid station, I could find an invalid, and if I search for an invalid station, no results were returned. But in terms of testing, when I wanted to explore a little bit around, I decided, let me try and break this application a bit. Let me try and explore beyond what I know. I found params that maybe should have never actually made it to production. So to kind of put it more simply, when you think about this, in terms of when we think about testing, there's always the human checking part, or more like manual testing. I want to verify that this user flow works. Or machine checking, thinking about unit and functional tests. These are important parts of testing, but they are not comprehensive to every single type of testing that we could perform. If you think about testing as more of a wholer sense, we look to learn by experimenting, questioning, and observation. So in this specific case that I just mentioned, I decided I was going to go beyond the bounds of what I thought the traditional behavior of this feature would be across our multiple applications. And in so doing, I found that we did have a bug. So was it critical? Would it crash? Would it report back to us? It actually wouldn't. We only knew because we decided to kind of test around a little bit more and go beyond what we knew. So this brings me to the next topic. So now that we know a little bit about the differences between what checking and testing are, when exactly should we test? When does it make sense to test an application? Let's take a look at a typical agile workflow. First, we'll look to try and determine what we're building. Hopefully, we'll try and determine what we build before we build it, hopefully. Secondly, if we know what we're going to build or have a general idea, we'll usually go ahead and try and build it. If we have something working, we'll go ahead and try and test it. Does it work? Does it not work? And then if everything looks good, we'll hopefully try and release the feature out to our users. These phases are more commonly known as planning, development, quality assurance / user acceptance testing. It's different. I've learned that it's very different in different companies, whether or not they combine them together, have them as separate, so I put us in one category here. And the idea of release is out to the public. But what's wrong with this? Well, it kind of makes the assumption that quality assurance in UAT only kind of occur at this testing part. So when we're thinking about testing, more about learning about our application as a whole, we are waiting until we've, decide what we're going to build and build it to kind of do all that learning. It also makes the assumption that that definition of quality, how well you put out something and how good it is kind of in the hands of only quality assurance and testing professionals. The problem with this is that quality assurance and testing professionals are probably going to be very good at finding problems or inefficiency in your process, but to speak specifically for myself, I cannot necessarily say that I'm a great developer or designer. I can't speak on every single attribute that comes into making an application. I mean, it would allow me to make this statement, I work in quality, so hence I know everything. And I would love to say this, but I don't think my coworkers would be too happy about this. So in kind of going back, when I talked about testing, I said, testing is a lot about checking. When we check, we're just performing an action. We're verifying what we know. But when we test, we're learning about our application. And we're not necessarily waiting until we get into a QA phase to learn about our application. Let's revisit the agile workflow. When we're determining what we build, we are actually learning about what we're going to put out to the public. We might be doing user tests. We might be looking at results, looking at user data, trying to find out what we're going to build and why. During development, you learn a lot, good things and bad things. You might learn you have a great code base. You might learn, as we've learned in the past, that I guess we have to refactor this entire piece of code. During testing, it's not just about verifying what I might know. Specifically, I know a lot about mobile, Android and iOS, but I don't know everything that could possibly go wrong with the application. For instance, like, I'm an Android user for the most part. So like a lot of like, when it comes to quality and what I might notice things from more of an Android perspective than iOS. So my opinion itself is already biased. And in terms of release, we would just normally think about getting the features out, but that's not necessarily enough. So I have a controversial idea. What if we didn't wait to begin testing? Dun, dun, dun. What if we decided we want to test early and as early and often in any way possible? Of course, more minions. Dun, dun, dun. And what if we decided that quality was actually our driving factor? If we're going to release and push some feature out to production, the most important thing that we want to talk about is quality. That's the most important factor. And the wise words of Stewie Griffin say what? Well, that would actually change our process a bit. We would kind of be saying that quality assurance is the central part of every part of the process. The most important thing is not necessarily to get a feature out there to users, but to get a good feature out there to users. And how would this change the points of our agile workflow? Well, going to planning, rather than thinking about what are we going to build, we might think a little bit more about what are we going to build and how. During this point in the process, we might start making tech designs to see if we're actually building something that's possible. Rather than just having requirements that say, let's do these things, we might also look and say, how will we try and accomplish these things, rather than waiting until we get to dev and trying to determine that. During the dev process, rather than just thinking about building features, we could think more about building features and testing tools. You'll notice I said testing tools, and I didn't say unit test or functional test here. And the reason I say that is because and I'm pretty sure most of you have run into issues where you build something that's hard to test. Let me give you an example. There was this requirement that came out this year that you might be familiar with called GDPR. It was a very fun thing to test. It was not. But during this time frame, part of the process that we had to think about was that we are all, my team, we're all in the US. We are not in a European country. How exactly are we going to test this feature full-wise not being in the country? We had some VPN tools, and luckily we had some reporters who volunteered to help us who were in European countries to test as well. But this is a really important part. If you're building code that you don't know how to test, how exactly do you know it works? And kind of defining this a lot earlier is better in terms of dev and QA members. It just kind of gives perspective to product about how long it actually takes to pull out a feature. Because making a feature is not just thinking about the requirements and building it, but it's also making sure it actually works. And then changing the traditional QA or UAT process to be explore, learn, and evaluate. What I mean by this is yes, we are doing some manual testing where we have test scripts. We are writing unit tests. We are writing functional tests. But also, apart from that, I learned about this stuff about exploratory testing. So after we test the requirements, I might assign out to different members of our team, hey, take a step back, and just use the application in any way you feel is appropriate, And I'm very loose in how I do this. And doing this process, I learned that we tend to find things outside of our features that might be broken. We didn't assume this feature that had nothing to do with our current feature would become completely broken, or there would be weird issues. But during this time, we just kind of say we're not thinking too much about, we're not mindsetting of one specific feature, but we're thinking about hey, if I'm a normal user and I'm using this application, how does it work? This might also be a good time to bring others into your organization to test. So if you have a beta test group, or it could also be what I heard is the hallway test. If you know someone who's not on your team or who doesn't use your product, simply walking by and saying, does this actually make sense to you? And if the answer is, I have no idea what you're doing, you might want to go back to the drawing board. And thinking about release as shipping quality things rather than just getting features out. I say this because sometimes we might release the feature and we can't answer the question, how do we know this will continue to work after we release it? If you can't answer that question, you're probably missing out on a lot. All right, so this brings me to my next point. We should really be rethinking the quality assurance mindset. Quality assurance is about ensuring quality, making sure things work, and knowing how they work and could work better. We want to think about breaking down how we commonly do things. Starting with requirements. We want to ask questions about the requirements. And when I say we, I mean everybody. During planning, we will have everyone on the team there. It's usually a 30, 40-minute meeting we'll have product, dev, QA, design. And the reason that everyone is part of planning is because there should never be surprises in the amount of work when it comes all the way down through the process through QA. And when I say ask questions, I mean anyone can ask questions. If you see a requirement that is unclear, that you have no idea what that means, it is a really good idea to ask, what exactly do you mean? And if you don't get questions, that's probably an indication that you might not be ready to work on that feature. An example about this, we once got a requirement from our product manager, I want to build this thing in 2 weeks. And during that time, we asked, and we're like, I don't know if we can build this in 2 weeks. We said that because we don't know what we're building. He's like, no, we can do it. And we're like, sure, we can do it. Let's do it. That did not work out well. We almost built a feature in 2 weeks, a very not so great feature, and believe me, there was a lot of subsequent bug fix builds that came out afterwards. So knowing what you're doing is very important, and everyone's opinion matters, so kind of having the input from different members of the team could help you inform how ready you are to ship that feature. Goes back to my second point of trying to understand what we build before we build. I know like this term comes out MVP. Let's just put out a small thing, learn from it, and grow. And I think that's fine. But you still have to have a bare minimum knowledge about what your small thing is before you put it out. So rather than having generic requirements like build an awesome thing, maybe say like build something that might last us for the next 3 to 6 months. So we at least have some frame set of like, are we trying to make the best product right now, and are we going to revisit, or are we just trying to get this out the door? And even more importantly, determine requirements that are testable and or measurable. Of course, I'm going to lean to bias towards the testable part. Like, if you have a requirement, like, make sure that there's a way to verify that requirement is working. This could be as simple as analytics. If you have analytics in your application, make sure that there is some dashboard or some output to verify analytics are actually being measured. You know, you want, like, the worst thing you could do is build a feature, try and gauge analytics, get no analytics, and then have no idea if you can tear down that feature or bring it back. Secondly, breaking this idea of handoffs. This is something I've seen very commonly between dev and QA and even product and dev. The idea that like I might be a developer, I'll do my work. I might be a tester or a quality assurance professional, so I'll test my work, but just kind of like throwing it over the bridge. Like, oh, I'm done, I'm just gonna have the other person do the work. Have all members of your team collaborate in decision making, and so what that means is there are certain, like if you're thinking about a feature, for instance, like you might be thinking about accessibility for your application. That might be something good to bring in QA, dev, and design to, because QA would probably say like how would they test, design would give some requirements about like what users might need to do to have an accessible feature, and dev would give the knowledge of like can we or can we not actually do that. And then also using tools that provide value to different team members. An example of this is, for instance, we've used InVision for one of our app re-architectures, and it's something that everyone had access to. So when there was a question about like, how is this screen going to look, everyone had access to the same account, and you kind of had one repository, one central place to know what the expectation was. So if you're using tools, and this also goes down to development, like if you are a PHP shop and you're using PHP on all your products, before you decide to switch over to like a different programming language like JS, make sure you might know multiple people or most people are willing to learn that new framework. The worst thing you could do is become the sole person of that language, so when you leave, your team is kind of like not so happy. It's important to remember that everyone matters. Regardless of your position in, on a team or as a company, everyone has a unique perspective. There are certain things I see from more of a QA testing standpoint that I would not see from design and DevOps. Like I always make sure that when I have questions about something should work, for instance, if I have a question about design or how something looks, I might ask a QA person to see like something looks kind of weird, but I don't know if that's like the acceptable version of weird. So that's usually when I'll sync up with the designer and say like, here's a requirement, and we're technically building to the requirement, but this actually looks ugly. So can we ship with this or not? Asking blunt questions to those people because they're the people best equipped to make those decisions. And then the idea of exploring the application. So replacing your QA to think about advocating for the end user. The reality is I do use this app, so I am one of the end users of our application, but I am not every single end user, and I can't attribute for every single case. So when you're thinking about building something and when you're thinking about testing, don't just think about the requirements. You should be exploring beyond the requirements. Think about, like, if I was the end user, would I love this application? And if the answer is no, maybe take it back to the drawing board. And then the idea of shipping being continuously ensuring quality. You are not done once you release the feature. It is not hands-off. It's not like I put it out there, we can move on with our lives and do something different. Ask yourself the question, how will you know this will continue to work? Do you have monitoring in place at a bare level? Do you have crash reports? Are you thinking about just reviewing user feedback? Is there some funnel where you can kind of tell that your feature is still working as expected? And if there's not, you might not want to release it just yet. So when I say break things, what I really mean is rethink the way that we do things. Rethink the role of quality. Quality is about putting out good things that are of value. So if you feel like you're really not putting something great out of value for the user or for your team, then maybe rethink about like how that process came to be. Rethink how and who with we make decisions. I've worked in consulting as well, so I kind of know sometimes this is a hard thing to like have your input matters. It's hard to balance that out. But you might not want like your product manager making all the decisions about the requirements of ways of saying, dictating like what tools you use and how you make those observations. You can't always control this, but if you have a valid opinion, such as like, if we go this way, it will take us 2 months, you should probably say it, because then usually the product is usually will say like, maybe you're right, maybe we should rethink about how we're doing this. And rethinking priorities. If you make quality your most important priority, it basically might mean features might be cut, because you're gonna optimize for putting out greater features versus putting out a quantity of features. So this is something that is probably going to cause a lot of debate. It definitely did when I started working, but it's important to remember that like at the end of the day, why would you put out a bad product and why would you want to? And then when I think about things that are worth fixing, I think about fixing broken processes. Like if there are things I've noticed, and I feel like you all to some extent have noticed, like processes that don't work for everyone, whether they be like the time you might have to review code, whether they be the requirements being clear enough. If you notice that there are processes that are like not working, use like a retrospective or maybe a one-on-one with your boss to kind of bring these up, because the amount of time you waste kind of trying to figure out how having things broken for a longer amount of time ends up wasting more time for you overall, and it's not a fun experience for everyone. And think about resolving issues before they happen. Imagine how great it would be if when we turned a product over to quality assurance professionals, we actually thought about some bugs that we might have ahead of time, and we resolved them before we even got to the point of having to see them in production. As you go through a typical process from dev all the way up to production, the stage that you find a bug actually costs the company more money, because it's more time to go back and change things. It's a lot harder to change things on your local dev environment than it is in production. And when we think about delivering, let's think about great experiences for our end users. I mean, we've all used products that we like and don't like so much. Think about that person. You don't want to be the person who brings that to life. So when you're thinking about building and pushing something out, think about, is this really a great experience for our users? And if it is, put it out there. If it's not, maybe don't put it out there. So in other words, in the words of Testing Manifesto, we think about testing throughout the process. So this is the idea of quality as a central part of the process, instead of testing at the end. We hope to prevent bugs versus over finding them. We want to test our understanding over just checking functionality. An idea where we would build the best system rather than just focusing on breaking all the components to try and find out what we did wrong. And then on a higher level, we think that the responsibility of quality is the responsibility of the team, everyone, and not just the responsibility of the tester. And it's not over yet. So I thought the best way to kind of like impart this knowledge would be demo time. So for that, I'm actually going to ask for a volunteer. And not to bribe you, but there might be prizes afterwards. So if that preempts you to come up here, that's OK. So I just need one volunteer. All right? Do you have a mic that you can use? All right. Hello, what's your name?
I'm Lucy.
Lucy, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
All right, so give Lucy a round of applause.
Oh, I haven't done anything yet.
All right, so I thought it'd be really fun to try and pseudo-build a feature in the short amount of time I have left in this presentation. So here for reference, we're going to think about, when we're building this feature, we're going to go with this workflow of determining what we're going to build and how, think about testing tools and features, explore, learn, and evaluate, and think about shipping quality things. So we've been given a requirement. And the requirement is build something that will inform me about what's going on in the world. And we're going to build this on a website. Lucy's given this very vague requirement. What are some things that you might say should go into this website?
I'd say there should be some type of like filtering probably, because I feel like all of the news that's going on in the world is probably going to be really overwhelming.
Yeah.
Probably some like how it gets updated or like what sources my news is coming from are really important. Yeah.
All right, so let's use one of your requirements. The first one where you mentioned about the ability that you have a website that has news, but you want to be able to filter that content. And we'll use this for the rest of the presentation. So now that you've decided this is your requirement, how would you kind of go about building this site? Like, what would you need to have in place to build a website, in your personal opinion? And you can always ask the audience of very well-known professionals for help if you need some.
Are you talking about like what tools I would use?
What tools?
I am partial to Python, so I might use like Django just because it's familiar. But yeah, depends on the scope, I guess, of the site.
What else might need? What else might you need when building a website? Thinking if you have like a lot of users.
I mean, you need like a web server.
Yeah.
And a place to like host your site.
Yeah. Fun
Probably
stuff.
domain name.
I mean, those are all great things to have. It'd be really hard to have a website without them. So like, let's imagine that you were so good at this that you built the website, and you built npr.org. Congratulations. And I will kind of biasly say I don't work on this product, so that's kind of why I picked it to demonstrate. So like, you've built this website, really fast. Great job. Seeing this website, like if you were like looking to see how you might filter something by news, how would you kind of go about exploring and trying to figure out how you might do that on this website?
Yeah, so I mean, there's already kind of filters with like the topics.
Okay.
And then, yeah. I'd also guess that there's some kind of like tagging for all of the articles, so like filtering by tags makes sense. Am I doing it right?
Yeah, so far you are. To the best of my knowledge, I didn't build this, so I wouldn't know. What other ways might you look to try and see if there's any other filtering on the website?
Like, where would I look on here?
Yeah, so what might you just try?
I mean, searching is like the first thing I'd probably try.
Awesome.
Oh, whoa, that's...
Is it loading? Okay, hopefully
Oh,
it is.
yeah.
Oh, it is. Why don't you search for something cool?
Oh, man. I like dogs.
There we go.
I tried to do something neutral, I promise.
Okay. Well, it is a news site, so. But basically, I guess to answer your question, do you feel like you had mentioned that you originally wanted to just try and filter out news. Mm-hmm. And you didn't just pick one way. You didn't just say, I'm just going to search or I'm only going to filter. You mentioned multiple ways, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, that's something that's really important when you think about requirements. If you have something very vague and we say, like, can you do this specific function? Can you do this specific thing? It's not, a user doesn't always think about only one way they can perform this function. So are you counting that when you're making applications? Then going to this part, like imagine that we've tested and we know like filtering is working. How would you go ahead and release this feature out to the public? Or what might you need in place to do that?
I mean, some kind of pipeline.
Yeah, pipelines. We're at a DevOps conference. Just want to point that out there. But yeah, so thank you for giving us a demo of what we've done.
I didn't do anything. It's all her.
All right. That being said, let's see what else. So, give you a little recap. While we're building, we want to think about determining like what we do, determining what we're going to build and how we're going to do it. It's important to lean on the expertise of the technical team. Like I assume that I don't know everything about development or products that I don't work on, so I lean on those expertise. I ask questions, and everyone should feel empowered to ask questions to like where it makes the most sense. It's really cool to think about thinking outside the box. I mean, I think it's very easy to kind of get in our frame sets of like, I am QA, I am dev, I will do it this way. Sometimes taking the opportunity to learn. Learning could just be listening to a podcast. It could be like, taking the opportunity to look at another product at your company, even if you're not working on it, just to kind of get a greater idea of how everything works together. Have some metrics. Make sure it's important to kind of measure what you're trying to do. I would not say necessarily over-metricize, but I would say that you want some way to kind of verify that things aren't working. And then think about what the release process is like. What does it really mean to release? Is it just clicking a button, or is it clicking a button and making sure it still works, and we know that will continue to work? So for some more information to kind of like learn more, I recommend checking out these resources. And we're saying thanks. I'm kind of short on time, so I don't think I'll have time for questions. But you can find me at Twitter at Ijeoma and I'll be around this conference. So if you have any questions, feel free to come find me. Thank you.